Welcome to Candidate Spotlight. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm a Deputy VP of Political Affairs, and I will be interviewing Ken Kaplan, who is running for U.S. Senate. Go ahead and introduce yourself and your campaign, Ken.
Well, I'm Ken Kaplan. I'm candidate, as you said, for the U.S. Senate, running as the candidate of the Libertarian Party. The way parties other than Democrats and Republicans get on the ballot is by gathering signatures. We gathered the necessary signatures. We were challenged by the Republicans because they don't like competition. We appeared in administrative law court, and a judge upheld our petition. So we are happy to say we're on the ballot. I have a college and law school education. I have a career as a commercial real estate broker. I've been a political activist for many years, and I've been a libertarian since 1973.
All right. And why did you decide to run this year? Like this year specifically?
Well, I decided to run because somebody has to stand up for freedom, and the Democrats and Republicans do not. So I am the candidate that represents individual liberty, both in our personal lives and our economic lives. Republicans tend to pay lip service to economic freedom. Democrats tend to pay lip service to personal freedom. Neither one of them follow through. I'm for freedom all the time in both spheres of our lives.
So when you talk about freedom, like I guess for the viewer, like what does liberty or what does freedom mean to you?
Well, it means adults ought to be able to put into their body whatever they want. We've fought a long battle to get marijuana legalized. It's still not legalized on the federal level. As a senator, I would hope to achieve that. Meanwhile, many states have legalized both medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. But that's the kind of thing. I mean, it's your body. You ought to be able to put into it what you want, whether you choose to put marijuana in it or alcohol, or whether you want to overeat or go on some macrobiotic diet. It should be your choice. Democrats and Republicans don't see it that way. They believe in the nanny state. They want the state to tell you what to do.
When did you discover the Libertarian Party?
I discovered the Libertarian Party during the 1973 election cycle. I was disillusioned. I had been a Democrat. I had been an anti-war Democrat. I had gone up to New Hampshire to work on Gene McCarthy's presidential primary campaign to unseat Lyndon Johnson as the Democratic nominee. But the Democrats pushed the anti-war movement aside, nominated Hubert Humphrey, and then in 72 they lost in a landslide. George McGovern was their candidate then. And basically, I was a person without a party, because I believed in personal freedom, and I believed in economic freedom. And as I mentioned before, neither the Democrats or Republicans embraced both. And I was watching TV in 1973 during the election cycle, and I saw a commercial for somebody named Fran Youngstein. She was running for mayor of New York, and she was a libertarian. And she espoused everything I believed in. So I said, wow, there is a party that stands for what I believe in, and it's called the Libertarian Party. Actually, because of certain election laws and nonsense, which Democrats and Republicans always try to keep us down, they won't let us use the name Libertarian Party in New York. So at that time, it was called the Free Libertarian Party. But I was so excited about what Fran Youngstein had to say, I called up the New York Libertarian Party, and they didn't have an office staff, needless to say. An answering machine told me where their election night party was. I was so excited about this party. I went to their election night party in New York. And there were some New Jersey Libertarian parties there, and they gave me the application, and I joined immediately. So I've been a Libertarian since 1973.
Okay. I'm actually kind of curious, just like a little bit of an aside. Where were you during like 64 actually? Because I'm kind of like fascinated by that election.
In 1964, I was a kid, but I was for Barry Goldwater, because Barry Goldwater espoused the individual liberty that I'm talking about. He had written a book that I read called Conscience of a Conservative, and I admire Barry Goldwater. I was absolutely for him in 1964.
Okay, so you were like Goldwater one year, and then Humphreys the next year, and then 72 is like kind of like when you felt like homeless.
As I say, I saw things I liked in both parties, but neither one was complete in terms of what I wanted.
All right. In your experience, what are the top issues that voters in New Jersey are most concerned about? And yeah, like just in general, and then also like focusing on like federal issues.
Okay. Well, there's a couple. The SALT cap, that's the state and local taxes. That's what SALT is an acronym for. The SALT cap is $10,000. And that means on your federal income tax returns, that's the maximum you can deduct for those state and local taxes. And that only was enacted in 2017. Before that, you could deduct whatever they actually were. And since property taxes are so high in New Jersey, it's not unusual for somebody to have a $15,000 or $20,000 property tax bill alone, let alone the New Jersey state income tax. So that $10,000 cap particularly hurts New Jersey residents, and I would remove that. Of course, I'd like to demolish the entire tax code, but one step at a time. So at least restore these tax deductions that New Jersey residents used to enjoy. Now, another thing that's very important to New Jersey voters, I think, and to people around the country, is body autonomy. If I think most vaccines are great, and I'm fully vaccinated, but I know some people don't believe that, and they should not be forced to be vaccinated. They should be able to control their own body. As I said before, you should be allowed to put into your body what you want, but you should also be allowed to not put into your body what you want. So I'm completely opposed to compulsory vaccinations, even though I personally think they're a good idea. And body autonomy also goes to a woman's reproductive rights. I feel a woman should be the one to make the decision whether or not to continue with a pregnancy. It shouldn't be the state. It shouldn't be the federal government. By the same token, I respect the views of people who consider abortion to be murder. I don't agree with them, but I respect their views. So I don't think tax dollars should be used to perform abortions because that makes those people feel that they're complicit in murder. Again, I don't agree with that view, but I respect it. So I think there's plenty of money around with non-government organizations and individuals who would help women who could not otherwise afford an abortion if that were their choice. I don't think it has to come from tax money. And so, as I say, that's the way I would show my respect for the opposing point of view to the one I hold about women's rights.
Yeah. On your website, you discuss shrinking government. What agencies would you close first, or like what kind of schema would you use to close as much of the government as possible?
Well, I would look to the Constitution, and the federal government is currently doing a lot of things now that are not enumerated in the Constitution. 10th Amendment, reserve those powers to the states and individuals, and the federal government has encroached in a lot of those areas. So wherever they've encroached, that's where I would eliminate departments and agencies and whatnot. Now, I mentioned before that I would want to abolish the federal income tax, and so we could get rid of all those agents that are enforcing the federal income tax and processing the federal income tax. So that would be one area of saving. We have two cabinet departments. We have Health and Human Services, and we have Education. They used to be combined under one department, HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. I think they could be recombined, and a lot of what they do should be eliminated. That would be another source of cutting costs. There's I can't even get started. There are so many places in the government, so many agencies that should be either dismantled or greatly reduced, and that would a couple of things I mentioned would be a good start.
Yeah, and I feel like the public is kind of hungry for that after we witnessed Elon Musk take like a highly bureaucratized like private corporate company and like cut like 80% of it, and then it just functioned largely as, I mean, it still had downtime, but it functioned largely as normal. I feel like we're coming right around to that time that the people are more willing to accept that. But what set of policies do you feel would reduce the national debt?
Well, for starters, the federal constitution, unlike some state constitutions, doesn't require that we have a balanced budget. So I would introduce legislation to mandate that we have a balanced budget. In other words, that we would not be spending any more than we were taking in. That would stop any increase in the national deficit. then we could start reducing costs. And how do we reduce costs? Well, for starters, we have a bloated defense budget. We have bases all over the world that we should be closing. We should only maintain what we need for the defense of this country, not for the defense of the world. So by closing a lot of foreign bases, we could cut our defense budget. We could start reducing the national debt. And through other cost-cutting measures, eliminating departments, as we discussed before, cutting down the size and scope of the federal government, getting it back into its constitutional limits, and following the 10th Amendment to leave certain other things to the states and individuals. By reducing federal spending, then we should have a surplus instead of a deficit, and that surplus should be used to pay down the national debt rather than for finding new spending projects.
Do you think that some forms of energy are more viable than others? If so, would you support some sort of policy that mitigates sort of what's the word? That would mitigate, like, second order effects that affect tragedy of the commons, or something that affects people that are not actual like customers of that energy, and if so, or if not, like how would you do that?
Well, look, climate change is a reality according to the best science at the moment. And science is always subject to further investigation and further knowledge. But right now, climate change seems to be a real problem. And we're seeing these incredible hurricanes and storms and whatnot that we really haven't seen in the past, at least not with this kind of frequency. Now, what to do about it? Well, it's one thing to recognize a problem. It's another thing to try to solve it by government and bureaucrats. Who notoriously do a bad job of solving problems. I think the private sector can do a better job of coming up with alternative energy and making it competitive. And when the federal government awards subsidies to one industry or another, whether it be wind or solar or whatever, they're distorting that market. And by mandating that things happen on a certain time frame, like electric cars and whatnot, without doing the necessary things to make sure that there's a proper infrastructure for those electric cars, we're going to have problems. We're going to have a lot of people with electric cars who may not be able to charge them in an efficient manner. And we may have long lines at the existing charging stations. I mean, I just bought a new car. It's a hybrid, but it's not a plug-in. I live in an apartment. I don't have a place to plug in a car. I really want to leave this to the free market to come up with the best solutions to clean energy.
How do you feel about nuclear?
From what I read, nuclear could be done safely, and it unfortunately got a bad name because of some accidents, because of some bad practices. But I think nuclear energy would be an excellent alternative to fossil fuels.
So when a lot of times people talk about regulating energy for climate change, do you believe that they are doing a good job of balancing like the fact that we actually need energy against like any dangers that climate change would cause? Or do you think that there is like a desire to achieve certain political objectives by restricting our energy?
We have to balance human needs and practicality with what's good. Now, I think that what the government has done, they've allowed certain amounts of pollution and trading pollution in one area for cutbacks in other areas. If somebody's polluting the atmosphere, they need to be stopped. Nobody has the right to pollute the air that the rest of us breathe or pollute the water that the rest of us drink. So I think if the government actually did their job, there are ways to prevent pollution without dictating what energy sources should be used.
And also, what is your opinion on the Green New Deal? Out there. Oh, sorry.
With trading carbon credits and whatnot, I think that's some hocus pocus. I would rather actually stop the pollution than allow more pollution in one place if there's less pollution in another place.
All right. what is moving on to a different topic? What is your position on immigration?
This country was built by immigrants. Okay. So as long as we have a health check, to make sure they say they're not a carrier of tuberculosis when they enter the country, something like that, make sure they don't have a criminal record in the place they're leaving, let immigrants come to this country. Don't give them any federal benefits, any monetary benefits. Let them be sponsored by friends or relatives who came before them, and give them a chance to make a better life for themselves and their families in this country.
Do you believe that the executive branch currently holds too much power? And if so, how would you reduce it?
Well, the entire federal government holds too much power. They've usurped power from individuals in the states. If we cut that back, we'll be cutting the power of the executive branch. We'll also be cutting the legislative branch.
Yeah. So I guess I would say, like, to like specify my question further. It seems like there is like a lot of leeway into like how these laws are determined, where they have where if there were anything requiring the government or the federal government, or excuse me, the executive branch to obey the actual law rather than, I mean, there's a lot of places where agencies like take liberties on how these laws are defined. And this might change, really fast with the new ruling on Chevron. So I guess my question is, how would you make sure that like the Chevron being repealed is enforced, and also, I mean, or do you?
So our listeners know. Why don't you explain Chevron a little more?
So Chevron deference was a court case, I believe it came out in the 80s, where essentially it was a test that the Supreme Court came out saying that, like, if there is a law that is vague, that the regulatory agencies should get to define any of the gray areas in those laws to determine, whether or not, people are being, whether or not these laws are being violated.
Right. So now the court said that really those duties can't be delegated to the regulatory agencies, that these laws have to be clarified by the legislature, correct?
Yeah, correct. That is my understanding of it as well.
That's my understanding as well. And I agree with that. And I would also like to see fewer presidential orders and more legislation. These presidential orders, these decrees, should be used more in emergency situations rather than when there's time for the legislature to decide how to handle certain matters.
So I guess what I mean to ask is, like, a lot of times, like, things will stay in place because of precedents until like a court case has been brought up to change the law. In this case, like enforcing the new Chevron decision. I'm wondering if there's anything that can be done at the legislative level to, like, say, all right, you've been like, you're the ATF and you have this habit of like regulating deciding that everything is a machine gun. Is there anything that you feel could be done to say, like, hey, if you do this, like, you're going to suffer consequences because you're clearly violating like your authority? Or is there anything that's like, is there any other preventative measures that could be done in order to stop things like that?
Going forward, legislation could restrict the scope that these regulatory agencies could regulate. They could more circumscribe what they could do. Obviously, you don't want Congress to get involved with the minutia of enforcing laws, but they could, I think, circumscribe the area where the regulatory agencies could make adjustments.
Getting off of political issues and more towards campaigning, has this campaign been any different than your other campaigns?
I would say that this campaign cycle is so consumed with the presidential race that I think there's less attention by the voters and by the political pundits. I think there's less attention being paid to the down ballot races, even including statewide races like mine, except in battleground states. So I think because of the sharp split between Harris supporters and Trump supporters, I think the other campaigns have been somewhat neglected.
do you feel like it was better, like that this is like more so the case in this year, or was it more so the case in 2020? Because yeah, I'm trying to remember like, how it was, and it feels like it, it might be that it's dominating, but like people are less focused on politics than they were in 2020. But I mean that's like, that's anecdotal and it's not really data.
I don't know. To me, I think the split is sharper now than it was then, or the venom is more venomous now than it was then. I think people on both sides really hate each other, and they're saying terrible things about each other. And
Yep.
I try to moderate that in my own discussions. People on either side call the other people on this side idiots and morons, and they're not. They have their reasons for their votes. They're not idiots and morons, no matter which position they take. I
Yeah.
wish more of them would move towards the Libertarian Party, though.
Yeah, or just leave each other alone in general.
Yeah.
How can people help your campaign?
Well, they can tell people I'm running because the press seems to have ignored me. So they can tell their friends that I'm running. They can check my answers to questions on the League of Women Voters website and on the Ballotpedia website. Where I've answered a number of questions that perhaps did not come up today. So vote for me yourself and tell your friends about me that, hey, there's a candidate who makes sense. He's not a Democrat. He's not a Republican, but he is somewhere on the ballot, and you can find him. His name is printed on the ballot. Vote for Ken Kaplan for U.S. Senate.
Excellent. Lastly, give us like a sort of elevator pitch as for why people should vote for you.
Okay. I don't think you want a follower in the Senate. I think you want a leader. And over my life, I think I've tried to be a leader on a number of issues. As I mentioned, before I was a Libertarian, I was an anti-Vietnam War Democrat. And I think history has proven that the United States sacrificed over 58,000 of our soldiers in a war that we never should have been in. I've advocated for many, many years, starting back around then, for legalization of marijuana, and now it's come to pass. I testified before a state commission about marriage equality when same-sex couples were not yet allowed to marry, when it was not the law of the land determined by the Supreme Court. So I think I've been on the right side of issues my whole life. I've been, I think, a leader. And if you want somebody to represent you, not the special interests in the U.S. Senate, then vote for Ken Kaplan.
All right. That sounds good. Thank you very much for your time, and have a good day. And
My
good luck
pleasure.
on the campaign trail.